My Lords, can I begin by thanking both my Right Honourable, my friend, the Right Honourable Member for North Somerset, Liam Fox, who was here earlier, and Noble Baroness Lady Hollins, in particular for introducing this bill here in this place, and for all Noble Lords for their contributions today. Many Noble Lords who have spoken today have talked about their own experiences or their own contact of people with Down syndrome. And when I was a child growing up in Edmonton in North London, in our neighbourhood there were a couple of children in the area who we used to play with sometimes who had Down syndrome. But what's interesting to note is the words that we used to describe them in those days today would be considered offensive. So it's absolutely right that we learn as language evolves how to describe people with different conditions. And on that note, can I take this opportunity to thank Rachel Ross from the National Down Syndrome Policy Group for sending me and other Noble Lords the appropriate language and terminology. It is important we get this right, and I know there's a cross-party consensus on this. And if Noble Lords have not received it, I have a copy in my pack, and I'm sure I'm happy to forward that on to other Noble Lords. We do agree, let me just be quite clear at the beginning, that the government, if there are no amendments, the government will be able to give time to this bill to support it. That's something I should be clear right at the beginning. We do agree with the need to improve life outcomes for people with Down syndrome. We believe that case is compelling. But it's also compelling, it's very common for people with Down syndrome to experience compounded health risks compared to the general population. And sometimes I know Noble Lords, when speaking, make the point. Sometimes people just don't have one condition. They may have more than one condition. And I think we should be aware of all the statistics. Nearly half of children born with Down syndrome have a heart condition. People with Down syndrome face an increased risk of early onset of dementia, with NHS recommending regular checkups to look for these signs from the age of 30. People with Down syndrome are also far more likely to experience recurrent infections and become seriously unwell. This can be life-threatening. And sadly, even though life expectancy has increased, the risk of death for adults with Down syndrome can be around 5 times higher than for the general population. But as I said, despite this, people with Down syndrome are living longer. In 1983, the average person with Down syndrome lived to 25 years old. Life expectancy is now typically around 60 years and has increased substantially in recent years. And yes, there are existing legal frameworks in place which require healthcare, education and housing authorities to consider people's individual needs regardless of a condition. However, there is evidence to suggest that they have not always worked as intended for people with Down syndrome. This can be due to a lack of understanding or appreciation by commissioners and providers of services of the unique needs of people with Down syndrome, reducing the quality of care they receive and their overall life outcomes. For example, children with Down syndrome may remember and learn information in different ways to other children. And we see the bill as a significant opportunity to drive forward important changes, raising understanding and awareness of the needs of people with Down syndrome. For the first time, legislation would require the Secretary of State to produce this guidance to health, care, education and housing authorities about how to meet the needs of people with Down syndrome. These authorities must consider the guidance. The relevant authorities would not be able to ignore it. They must provide strong reasons for not following guidance. So the practical impact of this guidance should not be understated. It will raise awareness and understanding of the needs of people with Down syndrome. It will support authorities to recognise how to adapt services to meet those needs, ensuring that people with Down syndrome, their families and their carers get the support that they need. And this is why the government supports the bill. Now, I recognise there are concerns that a condition-specific bill may be divisive, and I hope I can gently disagree, but also reassure Noble Lords. The bill is not about enhanced rights for people with Down syndrome. It's about making sure that these identifiable unique needs are not overlooked when planning, designing and delivering services. And the government has committed to develop the guidance through inclusive consultation with all interested parties, including some of the organisations that were named by Noble Lords. This will include, of course, people with Down syndrome and their families, people operating the services, and the organisations and individuals that represent people with Down syndrome. In the other place, as Noble Lords have acknowledged, the Minister for Care and Mental Health made a clear commitment that in developing this guidance, we will consider the links and similarities Down syndrome has with other conditions. The consultation will make sure that all the available evidence and experiences can be considered to identify what supports and interventions will best meet people's needs. Now, we anticipate that the guidance will be published within a year of this bill receiving royal assent, should it do so. And at that time, members in the other place and your lordships will have the opportunity to scrutinise the guidance when it is laid before Parliament. Now, of course, people with Down syndrome and their families need to feel confident that this guidance will not be ignored, that it will result in action, that there will be avenues available to them if they do not believe they are receiving the appropriate care and support. There will be accountability at a local level to make sure this guidance is implemented. The government made the commitment in the other place that statutory guidance relating to the Health and Care Bill will require ICBs to have a named person to have oversight for how the guidance is implemented and taken into account in practice. So I want to reassure your lordships that this does not restrict the oversight to health and care authorities. ICBs are required to work with local authorities to establish integrated care partnerships, which bring together organisations to decide how to best address public health needs, including housing and education provision. The guidance will be subject to regular review to make sure it remains current. Now, if Noble Lords will allow me, I will try and address some of the specific questions that were asked. I think it's important that I do try and answer them. In response to Noble Baroness Jolly, officials are talking to stakeholders about this bill, including the Down Syndrome Association and the National Down Syndrome Policy Group, to understand how it sits in and alongside wider policy on learning disability. We will keep the guidance under review and expect to update it periodically as policy and practice changes. Hopefully this will be a living, learning guidance rather than just something that sits on dusty shelves for years. And if you think about how our language has evolved and our understanding has evolved, of course it is only right that we update that guidance as research increases and we learn more about this condition and other genetic conditions. But I'm afraid the reality is it's difficult to say when an in-the-round look of services for people with Down syndrome was last done. And in some ways that highlights the need for this bill. The fact that we cannot answer Baroness Jolly's question directly, I think it highlights that we need to shine a light, as it were. And so it is through wide consultation that we will determine what the appropriate best practices services are for people with Down syndrome. And I hope that Noble Lords will use their ability to contact me as the Minister if they are contacted by any organisations that say that they have not been included in consultation. I know sometimes Noble Lords quite kindly apologise for writing to me, but that is my job as Minister. I accept that I should be held to account in this place, and I hope that Noble Lords, if they feel that any organisations are being ignored, will write to me. Noble Baroness Bennett rightly raises the concerns that we have received on this and how it relates to abortion. Let me be quite clear for the avoidance of doubt. The bill is limited to the needs of a person with Down syndrome after they are born. This means that it does not address abortion. This bill gives authority to the Secretary of State to produce statutory guidance, which will clarify existing frameworks and practices. Statutory guidance cannot be used to amend primary legislation, such as the Abortion Act. And by setting out the statutory guidance, the steps that would be appropriate for health authorities to take when providing services and support to people with Down syndrome and their families. We believe there will be a wider positive impact for expectant parents who are told that their unborn baby may have Down syndrome, but still it's all about the child after they are born. I'd like to thank my noble friend Lord Farmer for his engagement with me on this issue. The government recognises that people, quite rightly, with other conditions may experience similar problems. So that's why I reiterate the commitment made by the Minister in the other place that we will consider the overlaps and linkages, as my noble friend Baroness Neville-Jones said. Now, we recognise the concern that services prioritising different groups of people in a way that is not focused on assessing people's needs. I would point out that any preference that Noble Lords may be fearful of would be unlawful under the Equality Act 2010. The guidance is about making it clearer on what steps could be taken to meet the unique needs of people with Down syndrome, and this is something that the guidance could emphasise strongly, but we will engage and consult upon in detail in developing the guidance. The Noble Baroness Udin, I would like to respond to one of the points. I hear the concerns about consulting with people with Down syndrome and other conditions. We are committed to making sure that this guidance works and it evolves as we learn more. And the only way to do this is to address it via the best way of doing it, we believe, is to do it once this bill has passed. There are also some issues about the completion of the SEND review. And unfortunately, it has been delayed due to the pandemic, but partly not just for time reasons, but also the pandemic has highlighted some of the very real issues and exacerbated some of those issues, and therefore it's only right that we take, even though it's a bit, it's annoying or irritating that it's delayed, we take advantage of that light that's been shone upon the exacerbation of those conditions to make sure that we have appropriate guidance. The Department for Education plan to publish proposals from the review for public consultation by the end of this month. And it's important to hear from a wide range of people, including Noble Baroness Udin and her years of experience, but also many organisations that the Noble Baroness Udin has worked with over the years. I just want to re-emphasise the point, if I may, that this is not about giving preference to people with Down syndrome. That's quite clear. It would be illegal and unlawful under the Equality Act of 2010. So all I will say as I finish my remarks, I know there are Noble Lords who have concerns about this. I am grateful to the Noble Baroness Thornton for making that commitment from her benches that the Noble Baroness will support this. But I make a plea. Given the, I think Baroness Neville-Jones mentioned the time frame and the amount of government, the amount of legislation that we're trying to get through, if this bill is amended, it may well fall. So I do make a plea to all Noble Lords. And I remember some of you may have read the Robert Caro biography of Lyndon B. Johnson. And in that book, it talks about his amazing career. And one of the things at the end is the 1957 Civil Rights Act. And it was criticised by a lot of people for not doing enough. And his plea to them was, let's take this, let's bank it and build on it. And that led the way to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now, I'm not saying I want to equate these acts in any way, but they are more about recognising issues that ought to have a spotlight shone upon them. So I will make this plea to Noble Lords. Please let's together take this step. Please let us support the Noble Baroness Hollins for all the work she has done, the way she's pushed the government during the Health and Care Bill, but the way that Noble Baroness Hollins has highlighted many of these issues. One of the things I find as a minister in this place is how much I'm still learning on a daily basis about not just my portfolio of technology, innovation, and life sciences and international relations, but also about the many conditions that people have and what more we can all do to help them. So I do hope that Noble Lords will feel able to support Noble Baroness Hollins and not amend the bill. Otherwise, we risk taking a step, not making that first step.
My Lords, before the Noble friend, the Minister, sits down, could I just ask, on the basis of what he's just said, is he open to further discussion between now and committee stage on the bill? He didn't actually, I think, I did ask, he didn't actually say whether he was ready to talk further. I think there are perhaps others in the chamber who might be interested.
I hope Noble Baroness will take this person. I'm sorry I forgot to answer that specific question. I'm sure Noble Lords will recognise that there were a number of questions directed at me, and I hope Noble Lords also recognise that I always do try and answer as many questions, and that we do go through Hansard and make sure we sweep up, as it were, afterwards and write to Noble Lords. Of course, I'd be very happy to have further conversations. It may be me, it may be the relevant minister at times, but very happy to make sure there is a minister who will consult with you, but also any other Noble Lords who feel concerned that their concerns are not being heard enough. We can make that commitment.
My Lords,